Hello and welcome to the Linux Spotlight. This show is dedicated to showing off the best thing about Linux, our community. This community is made up of developers, distro maintainers, podcasters, and everyday users. Each one plays a vital role in our community, and the goal is to have a discussion with each individual about their journey into Linux and beyond. So join me now as we turn the spotlight on. Hello, I'm your host Rocco, and with me today is our special guest, Conor Murphy. How are you, Conor?
I'm not too bad, Rocco. And how are you doing?
Well, I am excellent because I love doing these interviews because I get to talk to people that I would never get to talk to in real life about one of my favorite subjects. And that's what makes this special. So I appreciate you being here, man.
No problem at all. I suppose it is very interesting. You get to speak to people from all over the world, including myself. I'm in Ireland at the moment, so.
Very nice. Well, you are a host of the Linux Lad podcast.
This is true.
You are the community manager for the Dublin Linux Community User Group.
This is true.
And you were recently on an episode of Linux for Everyone.
This is also true. That was actually a very enjoyable experience. Jason is a really nice guy. We kind of had a bit of discussion about Endeavour OS, since it's the new Linux hotness that everyone wants to be speaking about.
Yep, it is. And it was a great conversation. And we're going to talk about that episode a little bit. But Before we get there, who is Conor Murphy personally?
Okay, well, I am a 30-something, we'll keep it vague, individual. And I suppose my day-to-day job is I work for a managed services IT company, and I'm an on-site engineer, so I do on-site visits, a lot of on-site cover for different companies. This past week, I was doing an entire week in a company because one guy was on holidays. So if he's on holidays, then I get called in to cover. But it makes the job interesting because it could vary from day to day. Say, one day you're there, the next day you're there. Or in this case, the past week, this entire week, it's like you're there for the week. Some guy's off enjoying his holidays, so you're good to cover him.
I love it. I love the idea of reacting to your job like that, to where it makes it interesting rather than looking at it like it's a bad thing. That's awesome.
Yeah, a lot of the companies, fortunately, they tend to be in the city center or downtown area, as Americans refer to it. And so I tend to just get off at the usual public transport stops, and can, within 10-15 minutes walk, I'll be able to go to pretty much most of the clients of my company. So it's
nice. Very nice. Do you have any other hobbies outside of Linux?
I would say photography is something that I've dabbled in. I would not claim to be proficient in it in any respect, but it's something that is an ongoing, and I have done the thing where I've spent way too much money on camera gear. Not sure I know how to use it, but I'm working on it. And if in 10, 20 shots there's one that catches my eye that's a keeper, then I'm happy. Particularly in the digital... I always say, particularly if I'm out in a social event with my friends and they see me taking up this big whopper DSLR camera and they're like, ooh! I will say that the biggest criticizer of my photographs is me.
Right.
Which puts them at ease, because frequently I'm reviewing them on the back of the camera And I'll say, no, that's crap. No, that's not a keeper. That's not a keeper. That's not a keeper. That one came out blurry. That's not a keeper. Oh, that one. Okay, I might keep that one on the camera.
Well, there's quite a few photography experts in the Biddle Telegram group. So what kind of equipment do you have?
I have a Sony A6000, which is a mirrorless camera, and it's a Sigma lens. It's the 30 millimeter f 1.4, I want to say, off the top of my head. I did progress from the stock lens. The stock lens is actually not too bad. The one that came with the kind of the bundle that bought it from the camera shop, and this one came out to about, this lens came out to about 300 or 350 euro. It's a prime lens, so I always have to remind myself the zoom is my feet. So if I want to get closer to something, I'm going to have to physically walk over there.
I think that's the most underestimated thing in taking pictures, where people think like the zoom will be better. If I just zoom in a little bit, it'll be better.
Well, with digital zoom, it would degrade, but with optical zoom on the lenses, it wouldn't degrade the quality of the photograph. But the advantages of the prime lens is you get more of the out of focus or bokeh elements of it, and also the very fact that there's better low light, hence it's going down to all the way down to f1.4. And I've been along to some photography meetups, photography clubs, and some of them said, really, you got that lens for that price? So they're usually quite impressed with that. Lenses can be expensive, man.
Yep. Well, you seem like more of an expert than I am, so just saying.
Okay.
All right, so let's go back to this episode that you appeared in. Well, let's start off with Jason's podcast altogether. It's called Linux for Everyone, and I listened to that episode. It was episode 2 that you were on. Mm-hmm. And is that episode 2 or is that episode 1? Because he started at 0.
Yeah, it was episode 2. Episode 1, I think, was a 20 or 30 minute introduction episode of him just saying, this is who I am. This is what this is going to be about. I plan to do this. I plan to have guests. I plan to have and I, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you want to view it, was the first guest. So it seemed to go okay. I think we ended up talking for about an hour, and I think the segment that he edited it down to was about 20 or 30 minutes. So apologies to Jason for the amount of editing I did today.
No, it was a great episode because it captured two guys talking about Linux and loving every minute of it, and I thought that was the great thing about it.
Yeah. The passions I definitely did show, which I'm quite glad about. Obviously, I was familiar with the original part of it, so there's parts where I could say, okay, I was kind of halfway through a rant and he kind of cut it short. But he did it in such a way that you won't even know, but I can spot them because I know.
Right.
I was on a long freaking 15-minute rant at that stage, and he kind of cut it down to 5 minutes.
Hey, well, actually, the podcast it's not even over an hour, I don't think, the whole episode. So
yeah, fair play to him for bang up editing job. Props to him.
Well, before we get into Linux, I'd like to take you back to the beginning of your start in computers in general. So where did you start? Cue the music.
My start in Linux. So to give you a bit of a background, I was in the fortunate position for my father, who is retired currently, but was a primary school teacher. I suppose you would call that an elementary school teacher. And he had the IT post, or the IT responsibility in the school. Not saying that he was going to be an IT whiz kid, but kind of setting up the AV equipment in the classrooms and that kind of thing. So we got the hand-me-downs of when the school was kind of finished with a computer. we were able to bring home or he was able to bring home a computer that was kind of our family computer. And this was in the early to mid 90s, I want to say. So it was believe it was an Intel Celeron, could have been Intel Pentium. My mind is a bit hazy on that, but it was a 366 megahertz processor running Windows 3.11 for workgroups.
Nice. That's awesome.
And from there, we moved on to I believe that first computer was a Packard Bell, and I think our second computer, or it could have been a Compaq, and our second computer was a Packard Bell. And that was a Windows 95 computer that he upgraded to Windows 98 SE. And from there, the next family computer was a brand spanking new Dell Dimension. I think he spent about $1,800 on it all in at the time, running Windows XP. We still have it back there somewhere.
Oh yeah,
yeah, genuinely. Pentium 4 computer. I don't know if I said. And from there, we all that was our family computer for a very long time. And there we went into our own individual laptops. And the computer that has actually took the physical space of the old Dell computer is a computer I built myself. So my own tower, which we're recording on at the moment.
Very nice. What do you have in your tower that you built?
It's an AMD APU, not the latest generation. Don't know the exact model of the CPU, but it's a couple of generations old. But I think it's a 4.3 gigahertz quad core processor. What might date it is, which I got new at the time, was an NVIDIA 750 Ti.
Oh,
still in it. Hey, it does the job. It gives me my I have a 1080p monitor, and it gives me my 1080p and my 1080p gaming. So until it craps out, then I don't see any immediate reason to replace it.
Hey, as long as it's still working, man, that's all that matters. Mm-hmm. Especially with all the problems you can have nowadays with PCs, and I'll leave that one alone.
If anyone is coming out with the whole hater war of Team Red versus Team Green, if I am going to replace it, if it's in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years, it will definitely be to Team Red because of the inbuilt open source drivers with the AMD processor, AMD CPUs, GPUs even.
We can only hope that NVIDIA would sometime release the same type of code that AMD does for the kernel. I don't think they ever will, but we can only hope.
Hopefully. I think that actually AMD being the underdog probably was part of the reason for their decision. Maybe they thought if we're going in this direction, maybe this will give us an edge over our larger competitor. And I think NVIDIA don't have that same impetus to implement anything like that. They're kind of sitting on their haunches and thinking, we have this covered, guys. Let the money just keep coming in. So they don't really have the impetus to mess things up or to mix things up a bit.
Yeah, it's a shame but I do think that AMD is catching up so fast that NVIDIA better do something, soon.
On the CPU side, I was watching a Linus Tech Tips video, and he said, hold the phone. I mean, not only is in certain price points, not only is AMD meeting Intel, but they might even be surpassing Intel in terms of hardware and undercutting them on price. So AMD is definitely taking it to the man.
Definitely. And that can only mean that it's a good thing for consumers like us.
Without a doubt.
All right, so you have all of these computers. At what point do you hear the word Linux for the first time?
It was probably in university in third level education. In my wisdom or lack thereof, I decided to go for a computer science course and actually only lasted a year. But during that course, guys were handing around these Ubuntu CDs, and some guys literally right there and then had their laptops with them because for attending university lectures and attending the workshops and everything, so they had their laptops with them, banging the CD, and they were going whole hog. And I was thinking, I'm not that brave.
Wow, I'll say.
But it did plant a seed in my brain, thinking, what is this thing? I mean, I've heard of Windows, but what is this thing that you're calling Ubuntu? I didn't even know it was Linux at the time. And I started my own Googling around, came across screenshots of Ubuntu. And for me, looking at the screenshots, it at the time it looked very Mac-like for me, which is something that I was not familiar with. I had barely any exposure to the Mac operating system, so to me, this does not look familiar to me. With the GNOME 2, obviously with the taskbar at the top and the taskbar at the bottom,
right?
And brown, so much brown.
Lots of brown, dude.
This was during Ubuntu's brown era. Now they're in a kind of a purpley era, but this was during their brown era. So in my Googling, I wanted something that was Ubuntu, but maybe was a bit more Windows-like. So I came across Kubuntu, and it was a lot more pleasing to the eyes for me. It was blue, it wasn't brown, and it had the taskbar at the bottom and your menu at the bottom left corner, which was familiar to me as a Windows user. And this was a Ubuntu based off Ubuntu 6.06, the LTS version of 6.06. And surprisingly, I actually still have the CDs.
And there it is, Ubuntu 6.06.
I don't know if you'll be able to make out the 6.06.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think the lighting will be able to pick it up.
But, 6.06 LTS.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
And to just give you an idea, I'll read the back. So the system requirements: to use the live CD, you must have a PC with at least 256 megs of RAM. To install Kubuntu, you must have at least 2 gigabytes of disk space. Imagine that.
We've come a long way since then.
We have indeed.
I mean, you said about it before, but did you have reservations of installing it, or did you boot into the live CD, or what did you do first?
I believe I actually, because at the time I was not that risk averse to trying, to installing XP, Windows XP. I was not unfamiliar with the process. So in the back of my mind, I said, I will try it. I will burn this onto my hard drive, and I can always reverse the process if needs be. I installed it, and sure enough, it did not bring up my Wi-Fi card. So that was a goner from the get-go. And I don't think even at the time, I don't think it wasn't this was on a laptop that I was running, an old Dell laptop, and I don't think it was liking the specifications of the laptop either. So this was back in the KD3 days, and of course which is a UI element I believe they still have to this day, but I remember anytime that you're clicking on something, you get the bouncing icon. And you know your specifications of your computer are bad when the bouncing icon was going in slow motion.
Yes. And yeah, they still do have that available.
You're getting your bouncy, but then you're getting the bouncy. Oh, okay, maybe this is not built for my computer.
I love it.
That was a fail, and I think I went back to XP. But it was always in the back of my mind. And as I went through newer laptops, it was in the back of my mind thinking that Ubuntu thing that I remember trying out. It wasn't a great success, but oh, there's a new version out. I might try out the new version. Going back to all this was the 2006 era, so I remember the 2007 era, the 2008 era, the how is it, Hardy Heron and all of those back to that day. And so I remember trying it out, and what intrigued me about it was the customization, the customizability. I'm not saying you couldn't do it in Windows XP, but it was an afterthought. It was these third-party companies who were saying, we will theme your Windows XP, pay us $30, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Or download these theme packs and theme up your Windows XP. And a lot of them were very garish.
Yes.
A lot of gold, a lot of
bling.
A lot of bling. Bling out your PC for only $30. But what intrigued me was straight out of the box. You went into appearance, and you can make your title bar pink. You could make whatever you want. You could bling it out. You could make it as garish as you wanted, or you could tone down the hues of it. You could get rid of the brown, and you could replace it with calming blues or whatever, or greens or whatever floated your boat. And it was also during that era that I discovered Linux Mint. And part of the reason why it intrigued me was the more calming aesthetics of it. It was more muted greens rather than the browns and whatnot. Sure, it included the extra codecs as well, but I don't think that was as much of a deciding factor for me, as just it seemed to be based off Ubuntu, but slightly better. Maybe more geared towards your average user than Ubuntu was at the time. I'm not saying that Ubuntu has not improved in that area since then. Of course, it drastically has, but at the time, I think Linux Mint was just more for the masses than even Ubuntu was.
Yes, I have to agree. Ubuntu was trying to be for the masses, but they were trying it in their own way.
Yes.
And trying to be different from Windows, where Linux Mint was saying, hey, we're more familiar to Windows users. And you mentioned blinging out the desktop. I remember using window blinds, trying to get Windows to look a different way or whatever. And that is one of the best things that when I came over to Linux was that you could do anything you wanted, because I started in KDE as well. And you could do pretty much anything you wanted.
Even to this day, KDE is without a doubt the kind of simple by default, but you can go down into the weeds and definitely you can customize the absolute heck out of it if you want.
So you tried Kubuntu, and did you stay with Kubuntu then? I mean, then you went to Linux Mint, but did you stay with Linux or did you go back to Windows?
It was the case of dipping my toes and then returning back to the familiar, safe solitude of Windows at the time. It could have been as the different versions of Ubuntu were coming out, the Hardy Herons and so on and so forth. It could have been I was running it for a day and thinking, no, that one thing, let's say if it's Wi-Fi support, that hasn't been fixed yet, so I'll go back. Or it could have been a month or two even. And a lot of the time I was actually running it for longer and longer periods, and thinking, could this be a replacement? Could this? And cross-platform applications that I discovered on Ubuntu, in my Googling, actually found out that some of them were available for Windows as well. So it actually worked in both directions, where I was using more and more free and open source software, regardless of the platform that I was on. And the educator was actually Ubuntu, because I was finding out that there's a program that I'm familiar with on Windows, for example, Microsoft Office, and
Mm-hmm.
okay, it doesn't seem to have Microsoft Office, but it has this thing called Open Office. And then finding out, oh, Open Office is actually available for Windows as well. So switching over to, particularly for personal computers, I don't have to pay a license for Microsoft Office, and I could run Open Office on my computer. And then as that progressed, and then finding or following the whole history, and then Open Office switching over to LibreOffice, and of course myself switched over immediately as well. And I've recommended LibreOffice to quite a few family members who are not really that tech savvy. My dad uses Firefox and LibreOffice, and I'd say he doesn't care about the philosophy behind it, as long as it works and as long as it doesn't prompt him for purchasing a license or anything like that. I'm sure he's perfectly happy. I'm sure if any kind of pop-ups come up about LibreOffice, like it needs to be updated or something like that, so I'm sure I'm going to get a phone call. Connor, that Office thing that you installed on my computer is asking me questions. Can you come over?
So you are the family support guy now.
I think anyone who's any way tech savvy, I mean, it's my day job as well. You do become the IT guy in your family, unfortunately. And when going over visiting elderly aunts and uncles, I remember one a couple of years ago. It was literally I cannot connect my phone to my car via Bluetooth. Can you come over and
yeah. Hey, but you handled it, right?
I handled it.
Nice. So do you still use Windows in any way?
Myself personally, no. I have been Windows free for about 2 to 3 years now. Obviously, in a work professional sense, I do have been supplied with a work laptop, and that's running Windows 10. Most of the clients of the company I work for, they're all running Windows 10, and if not, they soon will be, because of the whole dreaded Windows 7 coming out of 2020, I think it is. Yep. So there's quite a few support tickets have been created about the Windows 10 migration.
Well, that businesses take extremely long time to upgrade, whether it was from XP to Windows 7. I know companies that had just upgraded to Windows 7 like 2 years ago, so yeah, they definitely don't do that on a whim.
And in recent memory, in the last couple of weeks, I wasn't involved in the migration, but I was involved in the kind of the after support of they went through with the migration and say, okay, we're going to spend a day or two of making people familiar with Windows 10. If they've any questions, you'd be on. So I was kind of wandering around. It was kind of an open plan office, and wandering around anytime somebody put, oh yeah, I'll come over to you. One of them was, I'm opening up the start menu. What are all of these the live tiles? What are all these flashy things, and what's this about Xbox and everything like this? I had to bite they're like, I don't like this at all. I had to bite my tongue and say, you're not the only one. Well, I know your pain. If it was up to me, I'd be freaking installing Zorin OS or Linux Mint on all of these computers, but unfortunately it's not up to me.
Well, that brings up a good point. Do you consider something like Zorin OS to be that you could hand it to people for them to use?
Depending on the use case, for personal uses, I would certainly recommend Zorin OS or Linux Mint. Both of them are pretty solid. From an enterprise point of view, I know, having speaking to the Artyom Zorin, the main guy behind Zorin OS, I believe that is part of his ambitions, and I believe he has, to varying degrees, has approached companies or maybe small things like your local council for your local city council or something, those kind of small businesses or anything like that. I believe, and again, I would not be the person to confirm or deny any of those things, but
Right.
I have been speaking to him, and I believe that is part of his ambition, is to do more enterprise support, to do more of those kind of rollouts. And I can certainly see it. I mean, in those, a school rolling out a whole fleet of computers running Zorn OS, your local city council of a town that's running that, like a 5 or 10,000 population sized town, your local city council there. And then once you build up the experience of those, then make it larger and make it larger, go across a city of 500,000 people or 1 million people or something like that, and then going to their city council and saying, hey, like we have a track record of running this for this local city council for 5-10 years. We do have the experience of that. We'll be able to scale up, and we'll be able to provide it for yourselves. So I can certainly see that as a drop-in replacement. In the past, other European cities, I'm thinking of, it was Munich in Germany, is the infamous one of how, and is the example of how not to do it. They took Linux and they brought it inboard, and it was their local, their internal IT guys were responsible for maintaining and doing upgrades to the distribution. Kudos to them for attempting Linux, but the support side of things was something that I would say was definitely a mistake. They should have approached your Canonical, your Red Hat, your SUSE Linux, those guys who do have enterprise contracts and do have experience dealing with those kind of large rollouts. You certainly should have approached one of those enterprise Linux companies. And unfortunately, that left a bad taste in their mouth, and I believe they're switching away and they're going back to Windows, unfortunately. But I have heard about other European cities. I believe a Spanish city might be attempting something similar, and hopefully they've learned their lesson from Munich, and they're going to be approaching your Canonical, your Red Hat, your SUSE enterprise contract or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely can be done if it's done the right way, but if it's not done the right way, it's going to be a disaster. So we'll see. Hopefully it'll work out. So on your personal computers, do you consider yourself a distro hopper?
Less so than I used to be. I tend to, because I have multiple personal computers, I have my desktop computer aforementioned and also a laptop. I tend to, because there's multiple computers, why not have one as in an experimental one more the stable distro hop less on. And my laptop is all Intel, so Intel graphics, Intel wireless, everything. So is the perfect test bed.
But you don't get all the fun and the headaches of NVIDIA and everything else when you don't have that.
I'm Broadcom. Don't forget Broadcom.
Right, Broadcom.
But it's tried and trusted, so I tend to do my distro hopping on my laptop. I don't know if it will surprise you or anything, but I was running Antergos when the Antergos announcement was made, and was still running Antergos when the Endeavour OS announcement was made. And I tweeted out to them on Twitter and said, hey, I'm an Antergos user. Is there a way to upgrade to Endeavour OS? Sure enough, they replied to my tweet and say, here's an install script, and the script literally just went through bit by bit. I'm sure just it changed the mirrors and it changed a few other things, and it was just the exact same install. I've not done a reinstall or anything on my desk computer, and in all intents and purposes it's running Antergos, or is running Endeavour OS now.
Wow. And it didn't have no errors, and it went flawlessly.
It went flawlessly. My desktop computer is running Cinnamon, And so it wasn't running a quote unquote supported desktop environment, because I think Endeavour OS are going with XFCE with ambitions to include others later on.
Right.
But the mirrors just changed. It did remove one or two small packages that I had installed that it removed, but I think that is more how they set things up out of the box. So I believe at the time it removed Yay and removed Pamac. And from experimenting with Endeavour OS since on my laptop, it seems that Yay was installed by default. So maybe that was just that script was just a very early build of something, or maybe when it was pinging off to the servers, that was their ambition at the time, and then maybe they've changed that. Pamac was one that I noticed that was even missing on the stable release that they've released out to everyone. So I say that is a decision made by themselves. Pamac, if anyone is unfamiliar, is a GTK graphical way of searching the Arch repos, and it's just a simple toggle to turn on the AUR support. And
yes, very nice.
The AUR is addictive, man. Once you go to the AUR, you do not want to go back, because it has everything.
It has pretty much everything you could possibly imagine or want. Well, you mentioned that you use Cinnamon.
Yes.
Is that a because you got used to it on Linux Mint, or what do you think about the Cinnamon desktop in general?
I'm very much a fan. For me, it's more customizable than GNOME out of the box. It's more familiar with your taskbar at the bottom and your menu, a searchable menu. But it also has compatibility with the GTK apps. I know Linux Mint they're doing their own forks, and they have their X apps, and
yes,
they try to keep the aesthetics a certain way. I've used GNOME when I'm experimenting on my laptop. I've used, so I don't necessarily dislike the appearance of GNOME or the GNOME apps. So I can install gedit, and I have gedit installed on this computer here, and of course that is the new GNOME 3 layout. And during my times in GNOME, I nearly was switched over to GNOME full time on my laptop. The annoying thing that happened to me was the single process. It annoyed the absolute hell out of me. There was occasions where I would need to connect to a Wi-Fi connection, bring up the open Wi-Fi dialog. The open Wi-Fi dialog would hang, and that would cause the entire desktop environment to hang. So I couldn't do anything else.
Right.
I could have been working on something in the background. I could have been writing something in LibreOffice or something while multitasking. Doesn't matter. It's all home. That is just pure bad design.
I agree. It's totally bad design from the begin with, but to be honest with you, I run Pop OS, and I have not had, since I got this computer back in April, that's when I started, I installed Pop OS, and I have had not one crash or one hang with GNOME since this has been on.
That is fantastic. That's great to hear. And as I said, I got used to the way GNOME was laid out, particularly on my laptop. I was thinking, okay, on my laptop it makes sense, because the laptop naturally is keyboard centric. You bring up your screen, you're typing on your keyboard, so it makes sense to just hit one key, type away, launch an app, hit another key. It's very task orientated, rather than on your desktop you're dragging windows around between multiple monitors. It's more of a, for me at least, it's more of a mouse friendly environment to be on your desktop computer. So nothing against the GNOME developers or anything like that, certainly as it currently is. when it was first released, it was a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah, it was.
I hated it with a passion. I could not stand the thing. It was when it was launched. I was like, "What are you doing? You're taking Nautilus and you're removing features."
That's a feature, to remove features. Just saying.
And I understand they're going in their own direction, and the direction they eventually got to the vision that, and so currently I can respect the vision that they have, because they've brought back some of the features to Nautilus, which is now GNOME files. Just get the branding right. For another tick in the direction of Cinnamon, if you've ever used Nemo, it is such a fantastic file manager. It is everything that GNOME removed from Nautilus and then some. So it is a solid, dependable, old school browser or a file browser, but with modern aesthetics. So you can theme it. It supports all the GTK3 themes and everything like that. And Teams is another rant about GNOME that we could go into. Cinnamon supports.
Well, talking about Nemo specifically, Nemo, in my opinion, is the second best file manager on the planet. Next to
say Dolphin.
Dolphin is the best file manager on the planet. I'm sorry.
Mike, who's one of the other hosts of the Linux Lads, is going to love you so much for saying that.
It is. I'm sorry. I mean, like I said, I started on KDE, and Dolphin is basically, you can make it whatever it is you want, including the inline terminal, all the panels that you can add to it, customizing whatever buttons you want in it, you know.
For me, KDE is just a bit too overwhelming. There is a balance, and for me, I consider Cinnamon to be the perfect balance, as in, it's not too simple and it's not too complicated. It has the settings that I want when I go into the settings, but I'm not overwhelmed.
I totally agree. We've had this conversation before that Cinnamon is that perfect balance, just as you said. Where I think, in my opinion, KDE should add as default a simple settings area.
Yeah.
For normal settings, and then you can click a button to go advanced. Yeah. That would allow it to open up to everything it has. But when you put that settings that is default in there for somebody, it is overwhelming. I'm sorry. So. And
anytime that I've tried out KDE, I just find that for the most part, I just tend to like the GTK apps better. The way the GT, like your gedit and so on and so forth, that I end up installing them anyway. A classic example is anytime that I'm on KDE, I install GNOME software, because for me it's vastly superior to is it Muon Discover?
Well, yeah, well, Muon is its own thing, and then Discover is the software manager, and it's getting better, but it's not there yet.
GNOME software, or if I'm on a Arch-based distribution, PAMAC, those in combination with each other, to me, are just that's the way to. It's such a great showcase for installing software, GNOME software with its recommended applications. It's Discover is heading in that direction, but it's just a simple showcase for the software that you may want to install. You'll have the recommended applications, your Audacity, your VLC, and so on and so forth. And there could be applications that you hadn't have heard of, and just click.
If you like the GNOME software, you should try Pop! OS, because it has the Pop Shop, which is based off of Elementary's.
I've heard good things.
It's really good, dude. It's really good.
Pop OS out of the box, I just don't like their aesthetic, but it's something that could be very simply changed. And one kudos I will give Pop OS is I hear it's one of the best, if not the best, distributions if you have an NVIDIA Optimus setup.
Mm-hmm.
That used to be the whole Bumblebee thing where kind of worked, didn't quite. For clarification, I've never owned this software, so I've never had that. Fortunately, I've never had to interact with those kind of niggles, but I've because been interacting with the community. I've had people saying, "Hey, Connor, have you?" Do you know anything that would help me in this situation before? Mike himself, I believe, has had an NVIDIA Optimus setup in the past, or may currently have, depending on if he still has that computer or not. And one of the recommendations that I gave him was that Pop OS seems to, out of the box, just seems to support it quite well.
I can't speak to that because I don't have that kind of setup, but I can say that Pop OS has worked flawlessly, and the gaming performance itself is probably one of the best that I've tried so far. So there's that.
And bring it back to Jason Evangelo, our friend Jason Evangelo. I believe he's written an article comparing different distributions for their ease of use for installing Steam and also the performance of Steam. And I believe Pop OS ranked quite highly for both. So,
yep, absolutely. So, Connor, what is your daily workflow like? As far as, is there software that you have to have on a brand new install? I'm going to install this first because I need this.
It would probably be Telegram for interacting with the community is probably one of the first things I would install. I do have a slight preference for MPV as a media player over VLC, but if VLC is there, it's perfectly serviceable. Nothing against VLC whatsoever. Just as a slight personal preference for MPV. I also install QBitTorrent is one of the BitTorrent applications to install. Of course, only for installing free and open source distributions via ISOs. But it's one of the go-to applications that previously I said that I prefer GTK apps, and I know the QBitTorrent is a Qt app. It's one of the applications that I prefer. I just don't tend to like transmission, which happens to be the one is installed by default in many distributions, but that's a personal preference. Since I talk about photography as one of my hobbies, one of the photo editing software that I install pretty much straight away is Darktable. Darktable is fantastic. If I'm on KDE, it would be Digicam. But for me, installing Digicam on a non-Qt desktop environment, I find that it pulls down quite a bit of the KDE frameworks and whatnot. It has improved quite a bit, but Digicam is my go-to photo editing software, and I find it's fantastically powerful.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, Darktable.
Well, a lot of software, including Dolphin, pulls down a lot of the KDE apps, so it's not like you could easily install Dolphin on a Cinnamon desktop without pulling all of that stuff in. So,
and saying, Gwenview, what is Gwenview doing here?
So, is there any software that you need that's not currently available on Linux that you'd like to see come to Linux?
Not one that I would say myself is missing per se, but the one is that it's a broken record at this stage, but it's a broken record for a reason. I believe we're lacking in the creative software, and looking at you, Adobe, with your kind of creative suite. If that is a go-to top of the hill, top of the mountain ambition that we should reach for is getting those large corporations to support with Adobe with their Creative Suite, or pick your large monolithic proprietary software that is used right around the industry example that you want. But for me, it's the Adobe Creative Suite. I have replaced pretty much anything that I want to use. I mean, obviously, as I said, I use Darktable rather than Adobe's Lightroom. Most of the online courses that I see, particularly in those video tutorial websites, your Skillshares and so on and so forth, they're pretty much all using the Adobe Lightroom. If there's a course locally saying we could teach you photo editing, and you sit down in front of a Windows computer, it will be running the Adobe Lightroom and saying, this is how you edit photos, and this is what you must buy in order to edit photographs. But fortunately, I've done my own research, and I've found replacements for most of the software. I don't do image manipulation as much, which will be your Adobe Photoshop or your GIMP.
Right.
GIMP is fantastic. I just never find myself using software like that, or Inkscape for your vector graphics. Anytime that I need to use anything like that, I just drop in and I just install Inkscape. I just install GIMP if it's not already installed. Creatively, the thing that I would do most often, when I find the time, again, it is a hobby. Sometimes you're just too tired after work because you can't be installing, or you can't be editing photos. Sometimes it can take a very long time, and sometimes it's a chore. But it is something that I do enjoy. I suppose I'm more of the, I enjoy more the doing of it than the after the part creating or editing of it.
Yeah.
So I would enjoy the experience of being outdoors and capturing photographs if I feel like it, or just enjoying the walk, or enjoying the whatever spectacle it is. Reason why I would join a photography meetup or a photography club is they would say, oh, there's an air show, we should go to the air show, then maybe there'll be interesting photographs of that. Sometimes I just put the camera down and I'm like, I'm here, I'm enjoying the air show, and if I feel like taking up the camera, then I will. I never feel any pressure on that. But when I come back, invariably, it's weeks, if sometimes even months later, that I end up come back and editing the photographs from that. There's photos on my camera from 6 months ago that I've just never got around to editing. So
it's Christmas time. Do you remember the air show we went back in June? Here's a photo of it.
Yeah, Christmas time, saying, remember when all the nieces and nephews and they went to see Santa Claus and you took a lot of photographs of Santa? Yeah. Did you ever edit those? I may have. I might. I'll be right back. I'll have those for you tomorrow.
Oh yeah, yep. Good times. Good times. So, a friend of mine, Michael Tennell, he recently gave a talk at Southeast Linux Fest about how bad Linux is at marketing itself. So do you agree with this, that we are bad at marketing, and what do we do to fix it if that's the case?
From an enterprise point of view, I do not think we're bad at marketing. More and more enterprise customers are aware of what Linux is. Microsoft, as we all know, hearts Linux now, so they're well aware of what Linux is, what Linux can bring to the table. Your average Joe, I would say that's the reason why I kind of run a community group, is to try and get that word out there. We try to organize talks. We try to, most of the time, it's just a casual meetup, like we're just having right now. Is we have twice a month. There's one where we have in a pub where if people want to come have a couple of beers, talk about Linux, ask us questions. What is Linux? Why would I want to use it? And another one is in a coffee shop, because not everyone wants to go to a pub. So we have the same thing, virtually the same thing, except they're with their coffees and their bagels and their muffins. And
I got coffee.
Yeah, nothing wrong with coffee, man. Yeah. So in a way, it's me trying to lower the barrier, bring it down a couple of notches, maybe get rid of the whole idea of it, that people, it's a total misconception, but people will come up and say Linux isn't that thing that you have to exist in the command line, or it's only for sysadmins, it's only for people who interact with servers. It does those things very well, but it can also be your photo editing computer. It can be your NVIDIA or your YouTube watching computer. It can be your Netflix watching computer. It can replace your day-to-day operating system. For 90% of people, it can replace your day-to-day operating system, unless you're doing something very specific with it, like you need Microsoft Office for that final 5% where you're doing something really really heavy in terms of spreadsheets or something like that, and you need Microsoft Office for that.
Right.
But if all you're doing is typing in information into a spreadsheet and want to have it represented as graphs, as bar charts, as pie charts and so on, then Linux can do that. So I would say there is a misconception out there, and I believe through ways of creating a local Linux group, we can dispel some of those myths. One of our more recent events was we were at the Dublin Maker Fair, and you can imagine everyone was there. There was people doing wood sculptures, there was people with their 3D printers, there's people there doing all sorts of creative maker things. And we were there, and we were saying, oh, Linux is this thing that can run on something small like a Raspberry Pi. We had a couple of Raspberry Pis, and we had our more powerful laptops in the background, saying we can run from everything from this to one of these in the background and doing demonstrations. We had a Raspberry Pi running the Minecraft version for Pi. So we had that on a, that was our kind of our front table, and of course all the kids were coming up and saying, "Oh, Minecraft," and saying, "Oh, well." We went into our sales pitch. Well, what's here's what we're demonstrating. Here's the fact that Minecraft can run in this small credit card sized computer. Yeah, don't care, Minecraft.
Right.
So we quickly found out that the message was not getting into the kids, but the adults, the parents, they were kind of a step or two back, so just keeping a loose eye on the kids. So, oh, they're over at this stand, and so we would go up to them and say, "So what's interesting here is we're see everything that's going up on that computer there. That's running off that small little credit card sized computer there. Oh, that's interesting, and it only costs about $35 and so on." And we had a Rock Pro 64, which obviously is a much larger single board computer. We had that running a demonstration in the background as well. So we're starting to get the traction going, building up connections in our local community, and any of those kind of showcase events we will try to go along to. And that's part of the marketing. That's part of getting the information out there. Is this demonstration that we're doing, where we're running Minecraft, or when we in the downtime when Minecraft wasn't running, we were minimizing the window. We could bring up the web browser, say, listen, like, this is a fully functional computer. Might be not the as fast as your latest i5 or i7 computer with your SSD that you may be running at home, but it's perfectly serviceable computer for about $35. So you could teach your kid coding. You could have it as their first computer, that you don't have to be worried about handing your kid your laptop, and that they may spill their juice over or anything like that. And hell, if they break it, it's $35 to replace. So it could be little Mary, little Johnny's first computer when they're 6 or 7 or something like that. So it was part of getting that message out. And in the background, we're kind of making this smart comments of good luck getting Windows to run on that.
Well, I love the fact that you're involved in getting the word out to the community. Mm-hmm. But are there people out there that give you that look like you're crazy when you say Linux?
I have gotten that look. I believe everyone has gotten that look. There's been people who, as I said, we have quite frequent monthly meetings and open to everyone. As I said, we're in a bar. It's not the case of we're in some cordoned off room somewhere that nobody can approach us. We could get random passerbyers in the bar coming up to us or anything like that. They would see our t-shirts because we'd have little tuxes on them or whatever. And we hand out what we call stickers and swag. So we have a little swag tin of anything that has been donated to us or anything that any of our members has kind of picked up in conferences or anything. Conferences love to hand out things. So
yeah.
And it's on the honor system of take something, give something, we don't care. People have donated t-shirts, so sometimes we come along with a bag and say, here's a stack of t-shirts that people have donated, as well as their stickers, their USB sticks. We have reached out to various Linux companies, Linux-friendly companies, emailed them saying, this is my home address, this is what we do, we have our stickers and swag, feel free to donate something if you want to. And fortunately some did. So I emailed Canonical in the UK. Canonical were very generous with donating stickers. Emailed Entware in the UK, and Entware were very generous, like a big shoebox full of pens and USB sticks and stickers. So big shout out to Entware. Also, you wouldn't think it, but we somebody on my list was the Document Foundation, who are based in Germany.
Yep.
Developers of LibreOffice, and emailed them, and they say, yeah, sure. It might take a while because we're posting it over from Germany, but we will certainly donate something. So they donated stickers. So fair play to them. The Document Foundation are a non-profit institution, so fair play to them for donating. And they were greatly received because Linux Mint or LibreOffice has a very, very good reputation in the free and open source world.
All right, so you're involved in Linux heavily, but going back, like, how does this whole podcast thing start out? You start using Linux and you just decide, hey, I'm just going to start a podcast.
If only it was that easy. I believe so the podcast and the community organization, they kind of one sprung from the other, but we kind of keep it separate in the sense of people have actually approached us and they've asked us, hey, is this the official podcast of the Dublin Linux community? No, it's its own thing. But the origins of it did start off with because the monthly meetings, we found out that we were having these conversations anyway, saying, what is this thing in the news that just after happening? And then that would spark a conversation amongst the people who were coming along to the events, the Linux community events. And myself, Mike, and Shane, who are the 3 original organizers of the Dublin Linux community, we've since added a 4th. But we found out that we had built up a kind of a friendship. We built up a kind of a kinship from organizing this, and also we were having these conversations anyway. So sometimes us three would go off to a conference, and we were having these conversations ourselves. After the conference, we're chilling in the pub and just having these conversations anyway. And it was literally at one of those conferences, I believe, where we said, this is interesting. Like, this is a very good discussion we're having. Why not just stick a microphone down in between us and record it? And started off as a joke. The first couple of episodes were very amateur. I believe it was actually in this house. We literally just all arrived into this house, sat around a table, stuck a microphone in between us, and then pressed record and said, well, okay, guys, what happened in the news? Oh, this thing happened in the news. Let's discuss it. The first couple of episodes from literally started off like that. And then when we went to All Camp, which I believe was about after our second or our third episode of the Linux Lads, we had gone to All Camp, and even though we're only new, we only had a couple of episodes out, people in All Camp some of them had heard of us, or in All Camp there was the elder statesman of the podcasting world from this side of the pond. So there was Joe Ressington, there was Martin Wimpress, there was Alan Pope, there was Mark Johnson also from the Ubuntu podcast. So, and we're like, hey, we're starting off this Linux podcast. Do you have any advice? And the positivity was overwhelming. And because of that support and positivity that we were getting from those guys, and the tips, and have you tried this? Have you tried that? Oh, I've actually listened to it. Your audio is not the best, or something like that. That kind of feedback was amazing, and we felt okay. Now we it was almost like we can't let those guys down, because they're so genuine, nice, salt of the earth, genuinely nice guys, that their positivity, their enthusiasm buoyed us, and we said, okay, we can't let those guys down. And on the basis of that, I think it was over that occasion, even though it only a couple of episodes out, I think Joe Ressington on that occasion later on, I believe maybe even the next day, he invited us along to Fostock Live. So we were only about 2 or 3 episodes new at that stage. We had only 2 or 3 episodes out, and as he said, well, we'll see you guys, we'll see how you are in 6 months, but the invitation is there. And it was almost like he was setting a target, which was brilliant for us, that he said, here's a target in 6 months' time, keep working on it, keep working on the basics, and here's a goal. And if you're still around, because who knows, podcasts might fizzle out. If you're still 6 months' time, here's a goal, and you're invited along to record a live recording at Fostock, which we did. And we struggled through it. It was a bit of a disaster, but we got there in the end.
Working on a podcast is a journey as well, because you get better as you go on. Mm-hmm. But I think that the best thing about it is when you have that core of people, and you have that realness, the genuineness of what you're doing. And I think that's what Linux Lads has, is it's genuine. It's not a show. It's guys talking about Linux, and I love that.
Thank you. It was part of the reason why we came up with the title as well, is we're just a bunch of lads talking about Linux Lads.
Well, I don't know. On your website, it says you're 3 ultimate Linux ninja experts.
that kind of humor, we're not taking ourselves seriously. That is all part of it. And as we tweet out our announcements, usually it's either Mike or myself or one of us. We'll come up with some random phrase at the end, and people have asked us, is that going to be appearing in the podcast? You'd say like some random nerdy pop culture reference. We'll say something like "never take the blue pill" or something like that, or just some random thing, and people say, "Do you talk about that in the podcast?" So, but I think eventually people are starting to get that sometimes we just make a random pop culture reference as the last line as we're tweeting out the contents of our podcast.
Well, your Twitter account says you are a mature rated podcast about Linux and open source from a bunch of lads in Dublin, Ireland. So you're in season 2.
Yes.
Of Linux Lads. So when did you make the first episode of Linux Lads?
I genuinely have no idea. I could check out about as much information as you can check up, which is looking up on the website, but I do not keep track of those things. I would say estimate about 18 months ago, but I genuinely have no idea. And on the mature rated thing is because of the whole thing of we are just a bunch of guys who sit down on front. Now we're our own separate microphones in our own separate locations. That's the way we do it. Rather than the early days when it was just one blue Yeti in the middle of us three having a conversation. If an odd mature reference gets out, if a curse word gets out or something like that, we're not going to self-censor ourselves.
Right.
So that's the that's the reason we kind of give that warning of it being a mature rating, or sometimes we'll say a not always safe for work podcast. And there's been a vast majority of the time, nothing of that happens. No any kind of mature references, no swearing or anything like that. But we don't want to, as we're expressing ourselves, we don't want to self-censor ourselves. So that's the reason why we do that.
Right.
Does not mean that there's going to be a swear in every podcast. So we don't get angry Twitter DMs or anything like that, or any Twitter followers saying, "You said it was mature. I'm expecting the swearing."
Well, you cover a whole host of subjects on Linux Lads, from distros to applications to everything. Tell us about what Linux Lads is about, maybe the goal of what it's about.
I don't know if we have talked about any kind of goal point, end point, aspirations, or anything like that. It started off, as I was explaining, with the history of it, and to be honest, that's how we're going with it. Is it will evolve over time, and we're still having fun with it. As time goes on, it may morph into something else, but it'll be a gradual change. Certainly from my point of view, I do not believe there's an end goal. We're kind of enjoying the journey as it's going along. We're enjoying the learning experience. Needless to say, we've upgraded our audio equipment since the original recording. Shane, who tends to do the editing, it's part of his learning is learning about audio editing. And recently he messaged me saying, up until now where we've been using Audacity, I might take the opportunity to start learning Ardor, because that's his ambitions.
Right.
But for the moment, between the three of us, it's just we're enjoying the journey. We're enjoying the fact that we're covering interesting things. We're giving our own take on it. We're not a news-heavy podcast in the sense of we're not weekly. We're fortnightly. So there's inevitably we're not going to be able to cover absolutely everything. We're not going to be the breaking news podcast. It could be, and we deliberately made that decision where we could be covering something that is old news, but it could be new to us, and
right.
We're doing our own unique take on it. There was something that I don't think it made it into the final edit, but there was something on the latest version where I wanted to talk about the Apple sign-in ID aspect of it. I was going to say kudos to Apple and talk about their implementation of that, and I found that quite interesting. And even though that was literally about a month after the news broke, I didn't care, because it was something that I wanted to talk about. I haven't listened. Basically, I don't think I've listened back to the final recording of that. I don't believe it has made that in. But that was just an example of, it could be something that's a month old, but I'm going back and I'm talking about it because it's new to the podcast and I haven't talked about it, and it's something that I want to talk about. And that really hasn't stopped us before either. It could be something that we just want to talk about, and that is the onus behind it is, as long as we find it interesting, then we will talk about it.
Well, that's an awesome way to view things, because there's no possible way that you could keep up with the latest news that's coming out. But one thing that Linux Lads has, is it has something for everybody. Like, you're not just talking about one subject. I think from technical users to new users, everybody could find something in the podcast that they would enjoy.
And I believe that is a reflection of our three personalities. I would be, as you can probably tell from what we're talking about now, my passion is introducing Linux to new people, is to breaking it down to the smallest level. In fact, sometimes I overdo it, and the other two guys have said, maybe you're explaining that a bit too much. I've genuinely got that feedback, and I've got that feedback from not only the other two podcast hosts, but also from feedback from the community as well. And it's something that I have to be mindful of, but I'm glad that other people appreciate it as well. Because you can imagine there's a very technical user, and if I'm breaking things down and I said, well, what Linux Mint is this, and it introduces this, has this desktop environment called Cinnamon, and what Cinnamon is this. If somebody's a very technical Linux user, or somebody's been using Linux for a very long time, I'm sure they're going to get bored as hell during that segment. But on balance, I would say that we do go into the more technical side of things as well. Mike, in particular, talks about Vim and talking about how he appreciates Vim, and there is the balance, and I think our personalities just work well in that sense of we counterbalance each other.
Well, I think that's a lost art, though, man, is to communicate to people that are newer users. Like, you're right. There are going to be people who are going to be bored in that type of segment. But there are so many times that when you're talking to people that I will maybe be going too fast in explaining something, and they're not getting what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely an appreciated thing.
Some of my friends who listened to it, where I kind of did their promotional thing of saying, I'm on a podcast, listen to it. And they are not the most technical people. And to them, talking about Linux is not something that they're necessarily interested in, but they've given me feedback of they enjoy the interaction between us. They enjoy the personalities. And they say, I did not understand 90% of what you guys talked about, but I found it entertaining. So that is feedback in itself.
Yep. Well, one of the best things about Linux, the best thing about Linux is the community, I believe.
Yeah.
There are other reasons why people choose to use Linux, like open source software, flexibility, customization. You had mentioned earlier about being able to customize the desktop. Is that the one reason you chose Linux, or were there multiple reasons?
Over time, I have discovered other reasons that, and the community is one of them. The open source philosophy would be, it's important, but to be further down on my list. I've described myself as a pragmatic user. I will install Spotify if I want to listen to music. I will watch Netflix. For me, my operating system is a vehicle for gaining access to the software that I want to use. If there's a barrier, as in other words, if Spotify was not available for Linux, it would be pretty hard because I could just listen to it in the browser. But if you're getting where I'm coming from,
Yeah.
is I'm a complete and utter pragmatic user. I am probably in the middle when it comes to the spectrum that goes all the way to Richard Stallman on one end. I would no way be going anywhere in that direction. I hear what they're saying, and maybe over time I might move in that direction, but at the moment I'm just being pragmatic. But I've always been a tinkerer, and the customization has always appealed to me. On my mobile phone, I've been a long-term Android user and long-term CyanogenMod user, which is now turned into Lineage OS.
Yep.
And the stock ROMs do have benefits. I mean, the camera app would work slightly better, or you get slightly better signal because obviously they would have the latest firmware, they would have the latest device radios, and so on and so forth. So stock would always be better in that sense, but Lineage OS would be 90% there, and it does have other benefits, which is the customization. There's the routing the device, getting rid of all the bloatware, which unfortunately this phone, which is a Samsung phone, is riddled with bloatware.
Yes,
it's a work phone, so I can't do anything with it. But even because it's a Samsung device, even if I could do something with it, Samsung is by far one of the worst vendors when it comes to installing Lineage OS with. Anyway.
Well, I have to agree that I appreciate people's opinions and what type of software they want to use, if they want to use only open and free software. But I am a pragmatist as well, and I feel that you should use whatever it is the best tool for the job at the time for you. Mm-hmm. So,
I champion the likes of Purism with their laptops. I'm waiting with bated breath for the Librem 5 phone. I'm not a backer. I'm the case of wait and see. And also Pine 64 with their Pinebook Pro and their Pine phone. I've been closely tracking their Pine phone. I'm on in their Telegram chat, and there's ports of Sailfish OS. There's ports of Luna OS, which is the spiritual successor of WebOS. There's ports of Ubuntu Touch, which I believe Ubuntu Touch will be what will be coming out with by default from the Ubi ports. But imagine having a phone that's like your laptop. You have a phone and there's 5 distributions to choose from. You have your post-market OS, you have your Sailfish OS, you have your Luna OS, you have your Ubuntu Touch. You name it, you can install it.
Distro hopping on the phone.
Distro hopping on the phone. You heard it here, folks.
Well, again, going back to the community is great. But were there times when you came over that you had experiences that were bad with the community?
Myself, I have not had those bad experiences that people are talking about, but I have heard through the grapevine of, and I know it's. I'd hate to single out any one particular community or one particular distribution, but it tends to be the elitist users, and those elitist users tend to run Arch. Not saying that all Arch users are bad. I'm one of them. even though technically Endeavour OS is not Arch, but it is based off Arch. So it's the kind of, it's a tool that I can use, and I myself have never installed Arch the proper way, as they say, because it just genuinely does not interest me. I might do it as an experiment in a virtual machine, just to see. It'd be an interesting, curious project to do. It might teach me a few things about installing. You must install this in order to get the Wi-Fi to work. You must install this in order to get audio to work, step by step, which most distributions just do for you. It might be an interesting intellectual exercise, but for me, I just want an operating system that works, and an operating system that is easy to install. And for my interpretation of easy to install is a graphical installer, which for me, what Antergos was, and hopefully Endeavour OS will continue along that vein. They're not trying to be a direct successor to Antergos. They're going off in their own way, but in the broad sense of Arch, but easy to install because it has a graphical interface, it seems to be fulfilling that, but close to vanilla Arch, because if you stray too far away from vanilla Arch, then you're getting into Manjaro's territory. So it is a balancing point, and they are being close to upstream vanilla Arch as possible.
Yep. Well, actually, that's a good thing that you say that you haven't had any bad experiences in the community, because I mean, many people have. I have had bad experiences in the community. Most of them are, years ago. So we're getting better. What can we do as a community to make the experience better for people, new users, or whatever?
In terms of being the physical face-to-face, obviously there's the go to your local Linux user group, and hopefully they're welcoming to new users. I can't imagine why they wouldn't be, but you do hear about, there is the reputation of Linux user group that's going to be full of the sysadmins, full of the neckbeards, and it's not going to be very welcoming to people who are brand new to Linux. That elitist attitude is something that certainly is not helping the community. So how to counteract that is be mindful that people are going to ask dumb questions. Be mindful that people are going to be curious. Whether it's in a forum online, whether it's been in Telegram, anything like that, is put yourself in the shoes of a brand new user, because most of us were brand new users at one stage. So go back in time and ask those. They're just asking the same questions that you probably would have asked when you're starting, as in, okay, I've installed Ubuntu, and now how do I install X piece of software that I want to do? You bring up the software center, and that's how you install new software. Oh yeah, but how to install it from the command line? Okay, well, you bring up the command line and you bring up sudo apt install your package that you want to install, and then a couple of months later say, okay, I want to install something else. I want to install Debian. I want to install Fedora. How do I install software on those distributions? And then bring them through that step by step. Ultimately, have the patience and to understand that everyone is a new user, and I believe it was Elle who said it on one of your previous interviews, is everyone is new at something. You might be experienced in 20 years experience in something, but you're constantly learning. You could be familiar with Linux, and you could be familiar with your Linux commands and how to deep dive into a Linux server. If the Linux server is not getting network, you know how to deep dive and troubleshoot in through the command line. but you might not be familiar with snaps or flatpaks, or so that might be new to you. So just be mindful of new users, and that everyone is new at something, and everyone is constantly learning. I myself am always learning, so I'm new at things as well.
So well said, man. I couldn't have said it better myself. Do you have any stories of maybe the worst problem you've encountered in Linux as far as technical problems that you solved, and how it felt when you solved them?
From a technical point of view, I haven't had many that spring to mind, because for me, coming from a tech support point of view, it was always easier to nuke and pave.
I agree.
So if I came across something that I have done the equivalent of, if I don't imagine that there would be many people who would be deep in the Windows world watching this, but I'm to make an analogy over in the Windows world. If I did the equivalent of deleting System32 on Windows, but for Linux, I would just wipe it and reinstall, because Linux, to install a Linux distribution from bare bones to having a basic install, in other words, install that the ISO image will get you, is only about 20 minutes.
I agree. It's so much easier to nuke and pave sometimes, because you might spend that amount of time just looking for the problem, let alone finding a solution.
Not saying that finding the solution might be worthwhile, because it could be a very good learning experience for you, but it's also time sensitive, as in, if it's on the weekend, you have time to kill, you're thinking, oh, okay, this has got my curiosity, I want to know how to solve this. By all means, go off and do your research, spend your 2 hours, spend your 3 hours watching YouTube tutorials, reading forum posts. That is your intellectual exercise, that is your learning experience, and I've done that myself. But if you're anyway under time constraints, or if you're tired, it's like, I just want my computer to work. You've done your 8-hour shift at work, you've come home, you've eaten your dinner, you booted up your laptop, and it's doing something, and you're like, and after about 5 minutes, you're clicking around, it's not solving it. It might be better to just nuke and pave. And you'd be surprised that's the solution, that in an enterprise support environment in companies, you'd be surprised the amount of times that is the solution as well. They have a pre-built image for computers, and if they're coming across this weird error, or for some reason the graphics drivers are corrupted or something like that, wipe the computer, start again.
Yep.
And if it's time sensitive, usually they have a swap and replacement computer. In other words, they have already a pre-imaged computer that they can literally swap out that tower for this tower. It could be replaced in 10-15 minutes, and that tower goes back to be re-imaged, because the graphics driver is corrupted, or whatever the reason is. It goes into stock, a ticket's created, re-image that computer, then that becomes a backup to be going back into circulation. So we know we have X amount of computers that are brand new imaged computers, and if anyone else has an issue, swap it out. And that is from an enterprise point of view, that is the solution. And once I got past the fear of reinstalling my operating system, then I don't even think about it anymore. The annoyance is getting rid of, but having to redo all your customizations So I don't tend to customize my computer heavily, just out of habit. I will install maybe 5 or 10 programs from the get go. Over time, I mean, if I'm running a distribution for a number of years, inevitably you do build up those applications. But I have a core of 4 or 5 that I just know that I'll be able to do pretty much everything that I want to do within this 4 or 5. And I know that if I wipe my computer, I could be back up and running within an hour, as in the 20 minutes that takes to reinstall the operating system, and then an additional 10, 15, 20 minutes to install the applications that I want to install. And any additional application I install as the use case comes up. So it could be the case of the use case for that application has not come up in the first 6 months. Then 6 months after my initial install, I'm thinking, do I have that program installed? No, I don't. Then install it. So it's not the case I have a list of 20 programs that I must install, because half that list I may not use for 6 months.
Right. Well, how do you learn? Like when you have a subject that you don't know about, how do you learn the best? Is it you pick a YouTube video, or you do a wiki or forums, or?
It tends to be I think I learn better with a YouTube tutorial. But what I do is I do my quick web search. Notice I've gotten out of the habit of doing a quick Google.
That's pretty good, actually.
So I do my quick DuckDuckGo, and whenever the first couple of links come up, I middle click on my mouse to open up in a new tab. So I literally go down and middle click, and then start reading the tabs. The first one could be a forum post, in which case that is the tutorial that I use. But I tend to learn better with a YouTube tutorial. But sometimes YouTube will actually slow down the information retrieval, because you're in a forum post, you can just go scroll. Oh, there's the relevant command. I can bump that in. That's fine. More and more, you find YouTube with their 30-second intro saying, "Hi, I'm la 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 la." I go, yeah. That's all well and good. Give me the command.
Skip. Well,
with their dubstep intro.
Yeah, right. Well, there's so much production in Linux videos nowadays. So where do you think Linux is headed for as a desktop, in the broad scheme of things?
In the broad scheme of things, I would have to say that it's not something that I think about quite often, but since you put me on the spot, I would say that unfortunately, the operating system is becoming less and less relevant, because everyone is used to their web applications, their websites. So that is the reason why the Chrome OS is becoming so popular, because they say it is essentially the bare bones operating system, and it's a web browser. That's your portal to the web. And for the vast majority of people, they seem to be happy with that, and they are completely unaware of what's behind the scenes. So I would say that Linux, in that sense, is a vehicle for a company such as Google to morph it into how they want their vision of what a personal computer would be. But I would say Linux will always have a place for your tinkerers, your hobbyists, people who buy an off-the-shelf computer, be it a HP, an Acer, Asus, Lenovo, and are not happy with the way they want an alternative. They're not happy with the way Windows is set up, or they're just frustrated with Windows for various reasons. Be it the live tiles on the start menu, which is a frustration point for many of us. And that's personally how I see the place for Linux is an alternative to the frustration points that other operating systems might present, be it Windows or Mac OS, or Mac OS being their walled garden. It's so curtailed, it's so tailored, and for people who their operating system, their computer is a tool. That's all they want. Say, yeah, I just want to open up my computer, type in something. Oh, there's YouTube. That's fine. I can watch my YouTube videos. For them, they would not have any interest nor inclination to explore outside of that world. But for people who say, is there an alternative? I do have frustrations. I cannot customize the Mac operating system the way I want to customize. I am frustrated with the way Windows is doing things. I could rant for this entire podcast with frustrations about Windows. But for those kind of people, I see Linux is a salvation. I also, perhaps, I was going to say perhaps controversially, but I don't know how controversial it is. I could also see Linux as a savior for Windows gamers, because of the whole Valve, Proton, Valve with their new virtual or VR headset, with I believe out of the box Linux support. So Valve is championing a change, that they have a vision. They want people to come over, and it's important companies, big companies like Valve, that I would see have to be able to do that, because they have the reputation in the industry. They have the finances to be able to hire the developers full time, and because of that, I can see that the industry is slowly changing. I mean, there was a recent announcement with the Blender Foundation getting support from Epic Games and Ubisoft, and I would not have expected that certainly 5 years ago. And I think it certainly is Valve's influence in the industry.
Yeah.
So that is a fairly long and complicated answer, but I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think that you need to continue doing what you're doing with the community, because I am afraid that you are correct, that there are a lot of people out there that don't really care about which operating system it is, as long as it works for them. And as a desktop Linux user, I don't want our community or our significance to go down to nothing, or just a few random people that use Linux. So I think the desktop is important, although I can't say that is for everybody like that. So
it's of course I'm going to say that the desktop is important, because that is what empowers me. That is what makes me passionate about the Linux community, is the desktop. I approach things from the desktop point of view. I tend to be a GUI first, command line second kind of person, and believe it or not, in the Linux community, we do exist. I think I've gotten flack about that on a couple of occasions, but and going to conferences, meeting people in person, you've no idea how inspiring that is, to go out, and there are so many inspirational people in the Linux community, and interacting with them on Telegram, interacting them on Matrix or IRC is all well and good, but you'll be 3 times, if not 5 times, 10 times more inspired after meeting them in person, after seeing the human side of things and realizing, wait a minute, that guy who spent a couple of hours giving me a tutorial on how to install, I don't know, VLC via the command line or something. Of needless to say, that wouldn't take hours. That's just the first thing that popped into my head. But interacting with that, with that, meeting that person in person, giving them thanks in person, buying them a pint, buying them a cup of coffee if you're in a coffee shop, buying them one of those little blueberry muffins. It's the human side of it as well, is what is so inspiring. And to that end, obviously I organize my own events, but anytime that I have the opportunity to attend another event, there isn't a lot of them in Ireland, unfortunately, but there's a couple of them over in the UK. OggCamp is coming up in October, and I've already booked my flights and accommodation. I've taken a couple of days off work in order to make it a long weekend, kind of flying out on the Friday, flying back on the Monday, because to me, the most important thing is interacting with the people. Going to conferences, that is how I get my inspiration. That is how I pick up my contacts. That is how I possibly make lifetime friends out of attending these conferences. So there is the Friday night pre-conference, we're all going to the pub, and part of the reason why I took the Friday off in order to fly over is because I want to be part of that conversation as well. And also, there tends to be, where the conference is finished, we're all going out on Sunday night, and I don't want to be one of those people who says, it was nice meeting you all, but unfortunately I have a flight to catch. I have to be good. I don't want to be worse for wear on the plane, so I will have to bow out, because it's an opportunity to spend a couple of days in a new city as well, and possibly go out and do your tourist things during the day as well. If the rota of the talks are not to your liking on any particular day, and you're thinking, for a couple of hours I'll take a long lunch and I will go out and I'll explore the vicinity of the city, then it's an opportunity to do that as well. But inevitably I tend to try and fly out the day before the conference starts and fly back the day after the conference ends. Because of that, to me, the talks are inspiring, but just as inspiring, if not more inspiring, is interacting with the people who attend.
I have to totally agree. Back in June, I went down to the Southeast Linux Fest, and it was my first Linux activity that I went to, and it was absolutely amazing. Meeting the people that you talk to every day on Telegram, you talk to maybe on Zoom, but when you're actually meeting and interacting with them person to person, that can't be replaced. And you're right, you do build friendships for a very long time by just going to them places and meeting the people that you talk to every day.
You can build up so much context, so much more context than just interacting with them over Telegram. Of interacting over the Telegram, you just say, I helped you out with that technical issue you're having. How's that going on? But if you meet up with them in person and say, I hear you've just come back from holidays. How's that been? Those kind of additional questions. How's the wife? How are the kids? You recently got a new dog or a new pet or whatever. How's that? And they'll come back to you and say, I've had many sleepless nights or something like that. But it's something that is additional rather than just the usual conversations you'd have. If all your interactions have been online, those additional questions, that additional context will probably never come up.
We spent more hours, me and Zebedee Boss, I call him PZ. He actually, I think, will be going to Odd Camp or False Talk, one of them.
I believe he has. I believe he said he has, yeah.
So me and him sat in the hotel drinking coffee and tea for hours on end, just talking about regular stuff, not even Linux, you know? Yeah. So, yeah, that was awesome.
And inevitably, at the community meetups, Linux is just what we have in common. But it is a social event, just like any social event. We could be talking about the latest Marvel movie that is in the cinemas. We could be talking about anything like a sporting occasion that happens to be going on in the city at the time, or anything like that. It is a social event first, but Linux is the thing that is the thing in common that is bringing people there. There's been times where I've booked a room or booked an area in the coffee shop for 3 hours, and most of that time has not been spent on Linux.
But that's okay.
Yeah, that is perfectly okay.
All right. So if you could change one thing about Linux, what would it be?
That's a very tough question. You know, I'm actually struggling to think of anything, because any choking points, any hardships that I've come across over the years, I have gotten over them, and I have found an alternative if it's an application. So I've kind of adapted myself to the Linux and open source way, in a sense, after a fashion. So nothing genuinely comes to mind at the moment that I would say that I would have to replace or would change about Linux, because for me, of old, I would say ease of use has come on leaps and bounds of recent times, with the likes of your Linux Mint with Cinnamon and your Zorn OS, your Elementary OS. It's those little things of some strange error is coming up on the screen. I don't know what that is. From a everyday user point of view, your distributions like your Zorn OS, your Linux Mint, your Elementary OS, you're that much more removed. There's that much more of an additional layer of refinement upon the base operating system, that the user is far less likely to encounter any of those weird technical errors. But of course, Linux is what you make of it. So if you have installed Arch from scratch, if you've installed Gentoo, anything like that, of course you're going to come across those technical errors. But you've built the system, so you have the inclination to research what those technical errors are. So it encompasses the entire spectrum, from the technical user to the novice user and the user who could not care less about what operating system their computer is running, as long as it works. And from that point of view, where I see Linux's strength is supporting, maybe supporting hardware that has the other operating systems are no longer supporting, or are requiring a financial payment in order to upgrade, or maybe they do not like, for example, going from Windows 7 to Windows 10. Maybe they don't like Windows 10, and we could be a refuge from there. For me, I've said it, I think, a couple of times. For me, peak Windows in terms of ease of use and in terms of functionality was Windows 7.
Yep.
And for me, some people may disagree, but for me, that is what Cinnamon replicates for me, is the peak Windows, peak UI from the Windows point of view was Windows 7. So Cinnamon replicates that interaction with my computer. That is how I'm used to interacting with my computer, and that's part of the reason why Cinnamon is one of my favorite desktop environments.
Right. It's not that Cinnamon replicates Windows. It's that Cinnamon replicates that workflow that you're used to.
Mm-hmm. And for a similar reason, when I say I install qBittorrent, qBittorrent, even I think on the Wikipedia, or maybe even on their website, say we replicate the uTorrent or microtorrent 2.x user interface. And part of the reason why I use it is because that is what I used to use when I was on Windows, and then when I moved over to Linux, that was what my workflow, that is what I was used to interacting with it. And if there's an open source piece of software that is replicating a UI, is replicating a workflow that I'm used to, then by all means I'm going to use it.
Well, I think it's awesome to think about the fact that there's nothing that you would need Linux to change right now. So
I don't know what that conclusion means. I'm just hopeless at thinking of things.
No, I think it means that Linux is perfect. I think that's what that means.
I like your conclusion on that. I guarantee you 20 minutes after this finishes, I'm going to think of something.
Yep, probably. So is there anything else you want to share with people?
No. Other than I will say I'm just going to plug where my socials and where people can find me. So I am a host on Linux Lads. That's linuxlads.com. I am the community manager for the Dublin Linux community. That is dublinlinux.org. And my personal Twitter is at SecularCelt if you want to follow me there. Also, if you've interacted with either the official Twitter accounts for either of the previous two organizations that I've mentioned, 90% of the time you're interacting with me anyway. So.
Awesome, dude. Hey, that wraps up our discussion. Conor, I want to thank you so much for being here, brother.
No problem at all. It's been a pleasure. Genuinely, it has been such a nice conversation. So thank you for that.
Linux needs more people like you, man.
Well, thank you. I very much appreciate that. And when I go to OggCamp, which is coming up in October in a couple of months, I will get a new refresher of my batteries, refill of the batteries of being inspired, and also I will interact with Zebedee Boss as well. So hopefully we'll get to share a beer.
Nice. All right. Thank you all for joining us this week as we spotlight the best thing about Linux, our community. Until next time, long live Linux. Got my coffee and I'm ready.
I got my water and I'm already halfway down. Also, notice the glass. You could customize the absolute. I was going to say a swear word there, but I'll self-censor. But you can. Okay.
Go ahead.
Just say anything.
Anything you want.
You're listening to Super Smooth Jazz.
I love it. It's perfect.